And a very good evening. Welcome to Farage here on GB News. Well, the day after the night before, excuse me, and you might wonder, what was all the fuss about? There was all that great noise, the 5 families coming out and pontificating, and yet the vote passed. 44, you might say that's quite comfortable. I think many would feel that it was, and I suspect that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, slept a lot more soundly than had been feared last night. So now we're sort of saying, well, what's the impact of all of that? How long is it going to take to get this legislation through? Will the government get it through? They say they will. Many others question that. And actually, will it make any difference whatsoever? What will be the extent of the claims that are put forward? Will those claims go all the way through the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court and, of course, to the ECHR, which, of course, stopped that in the process? Well, we'll be debating all of that. And my question to you on this, of course, is, the Prime Minister says very convincingly, this is the big deterrent. This will stop the boats. He's absolutely nailed his colours to that mast. So my question to you, viewers and listeners, do you believe the Prime Minister? Is this a deterrent? Is it going to work? That's the big question. They spent hundreds of millions of pounds on it. Do you think it's a deterrent? Is it going to work? Well, I suspect maybe the Prime Minister had a bit more sleep last night than my first guest on the show. You may recognise him because actually it's his show. Nigel, a very warm welcome back to your show, back to these shores. Fantastic to have you back. It must be a bit of almost like a culture shock.
Well, it is, and to be a guest on my own show is quite novel. Anybody sane, of course, would have got back from Australia and gone to bed, but that's why I'm here. No, I couldn't resist it, and there is just so much to talk about, isn't there? Amazing. I like Mark Francois as a person, the ERG boss, but like the Grand Old Duke of York, he's marched the troops up to the top of the hill, and then he's marched them down again. Exactly as you predicted. Let's just remind ourselves what Nigel said on Monday on this show when he was in Australia.
Will the backbenchers have the guts to vote it down? Well, normally they march up to the top of the hill and they march back down again. Most of them are a pretty spineless bunch. I hope that I'm proved wrong. What is for certain is that Sunak is on course to lead the Conservative Party to their worst election result in modern times. And frankly, I think they deserve pretty much everything that's coming to them.
So there you are, but the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, they're feeling a bit more confident, a bit more comfortable.
Well, confident they've got the party under control, confident that the rebels, frankly, haven't got the courage of their own convictions. How can you one day argue that what's being done will make no blooming difference, and then the next day effectively go along with it by just sitting on the benches abstaining and allowing the government to win? The really big question here, as you say, is will this make any difference anyway? And the answer is absolutely not. Number one, it won't stop any of the individual legal claims, and we know that just how long that whole process takes. And the big picture, this is all fiddling while Rome burns. The big picture, and we saw this when that first flight couldn't leave for Rwanda, when a nameless judge, probably not somebody even trained in law, I know it sounds bonkers, but these are the so-called jurists that sit in Strasbourg on the ECHR court. All the while that court is there, we are not in control of policy, we're not in control of deportations. So frankly, it doesn't matter what Sunak says. 4 successive Tory leaders have promised us they'll deal with illegal immigration, and we're no closer.
Now, the Prime Minister has been saying a lot recently, as has his cabinet members, that actually the numbers are down 30% this year, when in the Mediterranean they're up by well over 50%. So that's his line of argument. But this deterrent point is key. Now, whilst you're away, Mark White was in northern France, and he did a really interesting report for GB News. He spoke to some of the migrants. And I think we've got a clip here of actually what one of the migrants was saying to Mark White about the deterrent effect.
Mention Rwanda and the people here in the camps just laugh. It's become a bit of a joke. The threat hasn't put them off because no one here thinks for a second they're heading back to Rwanda if they make it to the UK.
So that's the key point.
Yeah,
It's-
and
it's a running joke.
once again, Mark White doing fantastic work for us here at GB News. It is no deterrent. Everyone knows it. And whilst the numbers are down, if I'd said to you 5 years ago that, 30,000 young men would cross the English Channel in dinghies and be allowed to stay, I mean, you'd have thought I'd been smoking something. So the fact the numbers are not as bad as last year, frankly, to hang on to that is really cold comfort farm.
And also, we've learned in the last week that the government is placing contracts for managing the arrivals in Dover
Yep.
and at Manston up until 2030. About £700 million worth of contracts. But as you say, all of this, in a sense, is modest, although significant,
Yeah.
compared to the other big news when you're away. The lawful immigration numbers increased by 20% in 22 to 745,000.
I mean, nobody did more to try and highlight the cross-channel problem than me, going out repeatedly into the channel, asking why our mainstream channels were not covering this issue. So I've sort of, in some senses, owned this from the beginning, and yet I am going to admit now, it is very small beer compared to legal migration into Britain. And these, Richard, are arguments I've been making publicly for well over a decade, that we simply cannot deal with the numbers. And whether that is having any hope of getting a GP appointment, any prospect of your kids or grandkids ever getting themselves onto the housing ladder, the near impossibility, as Christmas approaches, of driving around our motorways to go and visit family. Our quality of life is diminishing directly as a result of a population crisis caused by a government that, frankly, isn't concerned about the numbers. You know why? Because they're in hock to big businesses.
That's